Let's sculpt a slice of cake. The first thing we're going to do is use our cake template to trace and cut two triangular pieces for the top and bottom of our cake. Next, we are going to measure out where the folds are going to be on the long rectangular piece. You can use a ruler to measure out 5-inch increments, or since the edge of our triangle is 5 inches long, we can also use the triangle to measure out where those folds will be. Next, we just fold our creases on those measurements so that we end up with a cake that has two sides that are 5 inches long and one side that is 4 inches long. Hold your cake form in place and just double check that you can fit your cutout triangles on the top and bottom. Once you do that, you're going to start taping your form together. The first piece of tape is going to go on the edge, and it's going to hold the two cut ends together to form a seam. So go ahead and do that, and you can even reinforce this by taping it on the inside as well. Now it's time to attach the two triangles, one to the top and one to the bottom. So go ahead and tape both of those in place before you move on to the next step. If you notice that the corners or any pieces are sticking out too far, just go ahead and trim them with your scissors. Now that you've completely assembled your cake form, you are ready to start putting down a layer of masking tape. This layer of masking tape is going to form a moisture barrier. So you want to take your tape and make sure that as you place it down, you press it down very smoothly and flatly against the surface, and that each new piece of tape overlaps the piece before it so that you are less likely to have any gaps between the pieces of tape. This can take a long time to complete because you need to cover every area of your cake, all of the sides, and the top and the bottom. Once you have all of your tape in place, give it a good look over, double check, make sure that nothing is coming undone and everything is applied smoothly. Now it's time to make our Claycrete paper mache mixture. It is best to mix this in a large plastic bag that's resealable, like a gallon-sized freezer bag or storage bag, and you are going to need 3 heaping cups of this powdery paper pulp mix. I'm using a half cup measuring cup, which means I am going to be using 6 heaping half cups to equal the 3 cups that are needed to make enough paper pulp to cover 1 cake slice. We're going to need to add about 16 ounces of water to this pulp, but we don't want to add it all at once. So we are going to add about 1/3 of the water at a time, seal up the bag, knead it and squish it and mush it through the bag to get that water incorporated into the powdery mix. Check again, add a little bit more water, repeat, and then do it at least one more time until you feel that the mix is the consistency that you want. You do not want it to be dripping wet or very soggy. This will not stick to your cake form, it will slide off. But you also do not want it to be so dry and crumbly that it's not going to really work at all. Take a look at your pulp. It should look like this. If it looks like this, it's good to go. Take a look at your taped cake form and decide which position you plan to have the cake slice in when it is finished. Is it going to be standing upright or laying on its side? You do not want to put any paper pulp on whatever will be the bottom of your sculpture, so whatever will go against the table or plate. You only need to put the pulp on the other sides. It's a good idea to apply the pulp from the closest to the bottom edge first, because then that creates a foundation for the other pulp to put pressure on. Sometimes if you start by putting the pulp closer to the top edge, it will just sort of slide down because of gravity. So build up your pulp layers, cover up all of the sides except for the bottom, and then let it sit and dry. This pulp can take sometimes up to 7 days to dry. Now that your pulp layer is completely dry, it is time to paint on the flavor of your cake. So even if you want a vanilla or white cake, you still want to apply paint to it. And acrylic paint is the best option for this because it is actually going to create another moisture barrier that becomes very important when you are ready to frost your cake later. Remember that this texture of your cake is a little bit bumpy and rough, so you may have to work the paint into it. You don't want any of the white pulp showing through. You can also use a different color or even a few different colors of acrylic paint to now paint in where you might have a filling flavor. So if this is a layer cake, you might have a layer that is frosting or some type of fudge filling or some kind of filling for your cake, and you want to put that on with acrylic paint as well once the first color layer has dried. Now it's time to mix up some frosting for your cake sculpture. You're going to start with a half a cup of cornstarch. To that you want to add any powdered tempera paint if you want to have a color frosting. If you want white frosting, you don't need to add any paint, but if you want a color frosting, you want to add a spoonful or two of powdered tempera in the color that you want. Mix that in completely with your cornstarch so that it is pretty much one color. You can't really tell the cornstarch from the paint. Next, you're going to add non-washable white glue a little bit at a time. Don't add too much at once. Add some, incorporate it into your mix by stirring it and folding it in, and then add a little bit more and then a little bit more, repeating with mixing it with each time you add more glue. You want this to not look powdery anymore, but still look crumbly, but the crumbles should look like they're being held together a little bit. Once you are happy with the glue addition, you're going to now add some inexpensive plain foam shaving cream. Spray some in and then fold that into the existing mix. You might need to use a spoon and a knife to really scrape and mix that in. You're going to repeat mixing it in a few times until what you have is something that resembles a very thick but smooth frosting. Grab your cake slice sculpture, and now you're going to use a plastic knife or a offset spatula to spread your frosting mix onto your cake slice. Spread that on one of the triangles, whichever one you think would be the top of the cake, and then also on the side that you did not paint any filling on. That would be the side of the cake. So you're going to have two areas that you get to apply the frosting to. One of the triangles and then the narrower 4-inch wide side of the cake. Try to get it as smooth as possible, and you don't want to see any of the cake color showing through. If you want to get a little bit fancy, you can then add some piping details using either a pastry bag or a plastic bag that you have turned into a pastry bag with some piping tips. So you want to use a different color. This time I'm just using one that doesn't have any paint added to it, and you're going to pipe a edge along the short end of the triangle on the top and then also along the edge along the bottom, and let that dry so that you have a nice little fancy edge to your cake. Here's my finished cake slice. I hope you had fun making your cake slice. And here's another example of a different way you could color and design your cake slice. If you'd rather finish your cake slice to look like it's covered in fondant or rosettes, you might want to check out the linked video in the description.